We've got some catching up to do because we really, to a large extent, have been sitting on the sidelines for several years.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the State of Soy. I'm Aaron Putsey, and we are here in Des Moines. The Iowa Soybean Association is hosting a series of conversations around matters important to farmers, and I'm visiting with Alan Johnson. Alan serves as a consultant on trade issues, also a former trade ambassador, and former CEO of the Iowa Soybean Association.
That was the best job.
It's good to have you here, and obviously right now attention is on trade. A lot of conversations, and for good reason. How did we get to this point where trade is making so many headlines?
Well, I think it's been a long time coming, but it really goes back to when people started having the perception that the U.S. was being taken advantage of, particularly by China, which started when they joined the WTO some 20 years ago or so. Now you add to that, we just had elections, and a major issue in the elections was issues related to immigration, which included issues like human trafficking and fentanyl and stuff like that, and a president who is very determined to do something about that issue. We're seeing a convergence of all that in what is becoming threats of, or the reality of, trade tariffs on some critical trading partners. That's going to create some anxiety and uncertainty, at least for a while here.
We saw 6 or so years ago the issues with China. We saw what happened to soybean prices. We knew that in retrospect there was support for farmers to get them through the whipsaw that impacted soybean prices at that time. There's concern among farmers that maybe that lever isn't there to pull this time around. Is that concern justified?
Well, I think there's two issues involved with that. One is the issue of, is there going to be some support for farmers for the consequences from trade policy? And at least Secretary-designate Rollins indicated that she was supportive of that. She's very close to the president. And I think the president himself appreciates the agriculture community. You don't have to look very much farther than what the color of the map was after Election Day. But then there's also the more long-term issues, which is, in order to have a market, you need to be a reliable supplier. So even if you might be compensated for 1 year, it doesn't necessarily deal with the tail effect, which we're seeing to some extent right now in China's relationship with Brazil, for example, that has become closer over time. I'm one who believes that the U.S. should be diversifying into more markets. It's a bipartisan, both in Congress and across administrations, that we should be de-risking from China. So I think agriculture needs to be doing the same thing.
You've been directly involved in more than a dozen significant trade agreements. How has it changed now, where there's perhaps some greater flexibility in how trade agreements are pulled together that may work in our favor?
Well, first of all, I was involved with negotiating about 15 out of the 20 free trade agreements we have with countries, so it's a pretty good sample of those. What has happened with those 15 that I was involved with, which by the way doesn't include Korea, Mexico, or Canada, is that we actually are running a trade surplus with those countries that we did free trade agreements with. It's actually a growing trade surplus. It's been up like 400 or 500% over the last 10 years, particularly since Trump's first term. We're seeing that we're not doing free trade agreements in the traditional sense. In the traditional sense is that everything was included, everything went to zero. We're now seeing more agreements that are not everything's included, they don't all go to zero, and even if your sector is included, you may not be included. You can basically negotiate with anybody, and you just get the best deal you can, as opposed to before everything was included and everything went to zero.
Lastly, you often reference some countries out there that maybe aren't on the radar of the U.S. farmer, but that do hold some tremendous opportunity for the U.S., for U.S. agriculture. What are some of those countries?
Where I start looking is in Africa, which is going to grow tremendously in population. Parts of Asia that are outside of China are also going to grow tremendously in population. China actually is decreasing in population, and it's going to decrease a lot over the next decades. They're not nearly as rich as some of the other countries that we trade with, and they're not consumers. They're not a consumer society, and they're getting older. So we want to find countries that fit that profile. There's other countries in Latin America. So we've got some catching up to do, because we really, to a large extent, have been sitting on the sidelines for several years, while China, Europe, and even Japan and other countries are moving ahead without us.
Well, Alan, thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for what you have done to really elevate the issue, to go to work on behalf of the U.S. on very important trade matters. And it's something that we will continue to pay a lot of attention to, both on the state of soy and throughout other communications through the Iowa Soybean Association. Reporting for this edition of the State of Soy, I'm Aaron Putsey.
Farming is a competitive business, and you need equipment you can count on every single day. That's why for nearly 90 years, farmers have entrusted their grain handling to Brandt Agricultural Products. Brandt's full line of hardworking conveyors, augers, grain carts, vacs, grain bagging equipment, and tillage equipment are made to deliver the competitive edge you need to lead the field, and are manufactured here in the USA. For more information on our full line of products, visit brandt.ca today.